right, well, thanks guys for being here today to have this conversation. I think it's always super awesome to be able to just get students into a room and to just be able to have a real, genuine conversation about some of the topics of things that we're struggling with in life, right? I just want to just kind of open up the floor for each of you guys who feel comfortable to just share. What do you feel like is the biggest hurdle that our generation faces with respect to mental health? Why do you think it's become such a just a difficult thing for many to wrestle with?
It's just as far as like gender wise, like as far as for like men, I feel like, and guys, like society like puts up this like stigma that like guys can't like share emotion or like show emotion or talk about it, or just even be vulnerable in like any aspect.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think that's really bad as far as for mental health and just in general, just guys not being able to like feel like they can talk because like showing emotion is weakness.
Yeah, and I want to go off of that. I think that we are in a culture of a lot of like stereotypes, and I think we're also, personally, I feel like we've just grown up in a situation in which that there's a lot of pressure on us in a lot of different areas, whether it's school, your sports, like they're told you need to start so early in this sport, you need to excel in this and excel in that, when it's like we're built and I feel like so many teens are just like, will I ever be enough? Is this ever going to be enough? And I mean, I can speak for myself that I'm like, so many times I'm like, I might achieve something, but I'm like, oh, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I don't feel good enough.
I feel like we get a lot of pressure nowadays as teenagers, like Abby said, in a lot of different directions, whether that's like intentional or not. Like a lot of adults don't really realize they're putting that pressure on you. And then you're like, oh, I definitely like feel like I have to do that, or I'm not good enough for you. And so I think pressure definitely affects like the mental health of teenagers, but also the fact that it's just thrown around so much. Like, I'm depressed, and you're like, but you're like, you're not really depressed. We just use that word like all the time now instead of like what it really means. And so I feel like when you are actually depressed, you don't want to really say that you're actually depressed. Instead you like hide those feelings. So it's been like, people who say that don't really know what they're feeling, and then when they are, you don't always believe them because they've always said that.
That's good. I want to talk for just a few minutes about this idea of depression and suicide, right? And I think you guys hit it right on the head of just like, these words have become words in our society, right? When they should be triggers, right? They should signal to us that something is drastically wrong, right? That someone needs help, right? That they need support. And instead what it's become is it's just become normal banter, right? Normal conversation words. And so for any of you, like, why do you think that's such a don't touch topic, right? Even though we can throw the words around left and right and act like it's normal, why do you think it's so difficult to actually talk about depression and suicide?
It's so like such a fragile thing. It's like we don't know, we don't want to deal with it, because it's like that's a hard thing to fathom. That's a really hard thing to think about, in a really tough state to be in, that you don't want anyone to feel.
Sure.
I think like people ask you, oh, how are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm good. It's like, what does that even mean anymore? Like, you could be like super depressed at home and still be like, oh, I'm good, and say that like 10 times, and it doesn't really like mean anything anymore. Like, what are you feeling? Like, you can't feel sad. Like, you have to feel good. Like, good is the minimum you always have to feel when you're around other people. And so often we hide. We hide behind our phones. We hide behind social media and saying things on there that we would never say to anyone in person.
It all comes down to that we just don't want to admit our faults.
Yeah. Well, and we don't want to do the hard work of actually sitting in a relationship, right? What you guys are highlighting is the fact that we live in a society that is built on transactions, right? Our followings, transactions, right? They follow us, they boost our popularity, right? We follow them, we boost their platform. And when we get into these spaces, you guys are being very vulnerable and honest about it. It's like, sometimes I just want to cash in the transaction, right? You're feeling sad, just be happy. Fixed, we can move on, right? But you guys know, like, emotions and feelings, like, those it's way more than just, do this to get that, right? It's, you have to sit there, you have to endure it, you have to go through it with someone and sit in their pain and know that you're not getting anything in return for it. You're simply just extending the love and compassion that Christ calls us to, right? You guys have all hit on it a little bit. I want to dive into it just a little bit more about this idea of coping. I would love to just hear from each of you who have had an experience either personally or with a friend that you've had to walk alongside. How have you either encouraged them, or how have you personally coped with the loss of a friend or a loved one to depression and suicide?
It's a tough position because you don't know your role. You don't know what people need. Everybody copes differently, so it's like, how do you know what to say? How can you be there for them?
Sure.
I think that's just hard.
Yeah.
I had a friend, we weren't super close. We had been close back in like this 5th or 6th grade. But then we kind of lost touch. And then we talk every once in a while. We were still acquaintances, but he ended up taking his life freshman year. And that was just like crazy to me to see like all these people, like when we got together and like all his like friends and past friends, like we had like multiple services just talking through it and like whatnot, and it was just this weird thing of even me not seeing him like and really hanging out with him since like 5th or 6th grade, like still being like, what if I like, how could I have done better, like finding a way to blame myself is the automatic reaction of everyone. Sure. And that's something that I found was so important to me, was that I needed to talk through, like, the fact that I was, like, struggling with that even. People just need to talk about it more. Yeah. That's the biggest thing.
I think the main thing about coping is having someone else now. Like, you can't do it with yourself. If you're thinking about suicide, you got to go to someone else. Yeah. Because the problem is, you'll always fight with yourself. And most of the time, it's a losing battle. Yeah. You're not going to be able to convince yourself not to do it. Especially, some people think it's a cool thing to do. Or they're like, I just don't fit in.
I think one of the biggest things, we talk about at school, like come in and you're like, well, what if someone tells me and I'm not supposed to tell anybody else? That is such a hard position because obviously, like, you don't want someone to hate you, but you would hope that saving their life would be over. But it's, if we're being completely honest, that is such a hard position to be put in, and we don't want to deal with that. And I think we're, again, going off of this coping thing, I think suicide these days seems to just be an option. You know what I mean? Like this is how I want to escape. Yeah.
This option of suicide, or this action of suicide, the question that it raises is what if, right? It's really what we're talking about. I know, Gavin, you even alluded to it earlier. You said, it's just a question that you want to ask. You start feeling so guilty. What if, what if, what if? And so not that we're going to be, psychics or anything like that. We're not going to be able to read other people's minds. But I do think it comes to that, back to what you were talking about, Gavin, of just talking about it, right? And just being on the safe side, Shelby, right? Like just sitting in that place and not being afraid to be the bad guy, not being afraid to be the uncool person. But we're talking about people's lives, right? And suicide is a real thing. And if we don't take action, then who's going to, right? And what is that action going to be? And so my encouragement for all of us would be, as we surround ourselves with people in our lives who may be battling depression, who may be fighting that urge to commit suicide, what if we just took the time, whether it's every day, whether it's once a week, once a month, to just start reminding people of who they actually are in Christ? And I think that's so much easier said than done, and it sounds like the Christian thing to do, but how often do we really do it, right? How often do we take the time to stop, move past the transactional relationship, past the, you're going to do this for me, so I'm going to do this for you, and just simply stop and just say, hey, I love you, I see you, you are worthy, you are beautiful, you are kind, whatever, right? Yeah. How many lives could that save if we became a generation, if we became a community to see people for who they really are and to pour into them, right? Thanks so much, guys, for your time, and I really believe this is going to encourage a lot of people, so appreciate it.
Hey guys, if you like the video, move the cursor that you see on your screen to the like button and click. While you're at it, take that same cursor to the subscribe button, also click. Seriously, you're not going to want to miss out on what's coming up.